Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy. Today, we have Matt Brownlie. He has credits with DMAs, John Newman, Pussycat Dolls, Clare Fischer, and many more. Enjoy. First and foremost, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime.
I'd like to start off, if you could kind of go over your backstory, kind of what led you to engineering, how you've got to where you are, that kind of thing.
All right, cool. Yeah, when I was in my 20s, since I was a teenager, I was into music, playing guitar and bass, like everyone else. And I've always wanted to know how to make records and do album production, but I didn't know anything about it. And I'm kind of a late bloomer as far as this studio thing goes. I started when I was about 28.
Okay.
I was living in Buffalo, New York at the time when I made this decision to move back to Los Angeles, where I grew up, and just do the studio thing.
Right.
And somehow I did it.
Is there a reason you went back to LA instead of to New York?
I think there was a studio there called Chameleon West where the Goo Goo Dolls recorded and some other really dumpy smaller places. And, sorry, Buffalo. And it just seemed like you would have to wait for that engineer to finish his career and then, you know. Yeah. And in LA, there's so many studios there.
Yeah, for sure.
And, I had my father lived out there, so I had a place to kind of, to crash if necessary for a couple months, which I did. Nice. And, so I got a 9-to-5 job when I came back, and it was at an insurance company. It was the most office thing in the world. It was like office space, right? And then I ended up working at the studio called Clear Lake Audio through this program called Recording Connection. Okay. Which, was interesting. I think that was kind of the early days of that, maybe. Right. Because
it wasn't really a school, was it? It was just
they just put you in.
It's like an internship.
Yeah, they could just send a guy here to work with me, and that could back then that's how it worked at least. Yeah, I don't know if it's a little bit more put together now.
There's so many schools now that do all that, and then you get an internship after school and all that. But obviously, it wasn't always that way. So,
and so I ended up at Clear Lake Audio, and that's where they put me with this studio owner named Brian Levi, which is he's since passed away, unfortunately. He was really nice, amazing guy, just really old school. But as far as that experience goes, it was we were left to our own devices a lot of the time, and it was a playground. And coincidentally, the first person I really sat down and did Pro Tools stuff with or anything was someone named Chris Kahn.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Did he work there too?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I always forget that about Chris. Okay.
We went our own separate ways after that, but at the time, and he was really young. I think I was 28. He must have been 20 or something. I don't know. Yeah. Nice. And so I'm trying to remember, with that kind of studio, it was a mid-sized, kind of smaller, cheaper place, and a lot of blues bands, a lot of that stuff. Some celebrity stuff would come through, but I did a record with Busy Bone, which was interesting, and Julie Brown would come in. With her, I held the 2-inch tape, "Homecoming Queen's Got a Gun," on that one. I was because I remember that from Dr. Demento when I was a kid. It's kind of novelty stuff my dad would listen to. Nice. And I made it, Dad. Look. Right. But so I worked there for a couple of years, and then I was also mentored by this producer named John Hyler, and he really helped kind of get me up to speed on Pro Tools in a more advanced way. And he was real strict with me and stuff, which was what I needed. I needed some kind of discipline. As I was I'm working at the studio now, but I knew it wasn't good enough. Or what I wanted. Right. So
you wanted the big leagues.
I wanted the big leagues, and I didn't know really how to do that, although I did have his advice. And although he never had work experience in any of the big studios in town, so because he was from Chicago, I think, where he went before that. But he was a great producer. So what I did was I got this Music Connection magazine that every 6 months they put out every studio in Los Angeles.
Right, that's right.
Yeah. And so I went through A to Z and went there in person or emailed or did whatever. And by the time I got to W, I got a response.
That's amazing.
Within 2 hours, Steve Burdick from Westlake Studios sent me an email saying hey, nice. You can come and interview.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And I was still at Clear Lake at the time. This was 2010.
Okay.
And the interview wasn't good.
Yeah.
He asked me really basic questions like how many studios are at Westlake, and so I was like,
what? Didn't do your research.
But he gave me a chance, and I feel like I got a lot of chances at Westlake.
Yeah.
Like really.
All good.
And got a second interview and made it in there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't go to recording school. It was just that recording connection certification, which I did complete. Mm-hmm. But I think...
But you had worked at Clear Lake for a while, and so you had that experience, and yeah.
So I thought I knew what I was doing. That's the kind of thing. It gave me the false sense that I was like an engineer. And I had to accept the fact that I needed to start over again and completely go from being the guy that runs Pro Tools and gets paid for it to intern again.
Right.
Where I'm lucky I get to clean toilets for, with my tongue. I'm just kidding. And,
awesome.
So
how long were you at Westlake?
I was at Westlake, I think about 4.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And like July of 2014, I left, and that's about when they kick you out of the nest. They have a high turnover rate.
Okay.
I gave 2 weeks notice and left a month later, and I was put on a Slipknot session, and that was the last thing they did. And I was like, I can't do this as I'm going freelance, and that it would have been 3 months or something of assistant work with Greg Fidelman and Slipknot.
Yeah.
And to this day, I regret not doing that. I think that was one of the dumbest things. I should have just stuck with it, but I thought I had better things going on.
Yeah.
And but Westlake was a really, I can't explain what an experience that was. Yeah. It's hard to even to think about it right now.
Any big studio like that, it's it's crazy to work at places like that.
I mean, first impressions were I was intimidated by seeing the consoles, and I think I went into Studio D for a tour, and Glenn Ballard was there, and that Neve VR they had at the time, and it was a Chris Isaak session.
Okay.
And just seeing that setup, I was like, I've never seen anything like this. Even being like working in the studio already,
right.
It was a whole different can of worms.
Different thing, yeah. Nice.
And
so then, more recently, what are you focusing on? More engineering, mixing, production?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Everything.
I have mixing clients. Now I have a production client that I'm starting with named Ruben Najera. And we're going to start working next weekend. This is going to be from the ground up, recording, working on song arranging, mixing. Right. And I might give the mastering work to someone like Andy Van Dett or something. But
is that normal for you to do top to bottom the entire project? Nice.
Yeah. I prefer to record and mix.
Yeah.
Ideally in the same studio room. That'd be like great if you could do that.
Yeah, for sure. Nice. So a lot of what I like to talk about on the podcast is kind of how to get great results from artists in the studio, how to inspire them and stuff like that. So what, in your experience, what are the key factors in capturing the true essence of an artist's performance during a session?
It depends on the artist.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. You're going to get... I mean, I vocal produced Nicole Scherzinger once, right? But knows exactly what she's doing, and I was just there to say, okay, I think we can stop with this part and go to the next one. Right. So that was vocal producing. But some people really need a lot of help, and I've worked with some artists, some singers that are extremely nervous, and especially if they've never been in a studio before, it's kind of tricky. There's a lot of things to get used to, like hearing yourself on headphones, and being around all this crazy equipment, and it seems like it's such a big deal. There's so much pressure, but there's not really. I think it's just getting people to be comfortable and to be patient with themselves. And like I tell people, I have infinite patience. You can take as much time as you need. So it's just being really sort of relaxed and empathetic, and just pay attention to what their facial expressions look like what they're saying. And you kind of have to, everyone's a separate case.
Yeah, of course. And how does that vary? Like when you have your own studio here, you do recording here sometimes. How does it vary when, obviously if someone's, at a big studio like Westlake or East West or something like that, they're paying top dollar to be there per the hour or per the day, whatever.
Yes.
So it's like when you're working in home studios, how does that vary? Obviously, it releases that pressure a little bit, but what else do you consider?
A little bit, yeah. I don't consider that the result shouldn't be different.
Right.
Like there's no difference from me recording a vocal here than at Westlake.
Of course.
Zero. Unless you're talking about not renting a $14,000 microphone or something.
Right.
But you should always get the same result. But yeah, it's more relaxed here. You can go sit outside and smoke a cigarette or do whatever, have some coffee, and it's just sort of being at someone's house. Being at Westlake, there's more.
There's more pressure.
Yeah, there's more like, oh, I got to do something serious now.
Yeah. But that can also be, helpful as well. Some people perform well under pressure, they want that deadline, that, strict regimen, so it varies for sure.
Exactly.
When it comes to collaboration, how do you collaborate with musicians to create a comfortable and inspiring studio environment?
Oh, I see. Usually it's meeting beforehand, just doing some pre-production,
right?
Spending time to listen to all their songs or whatever they're trying to record and give feedback, hang out with them a little bit, just talk about their life story or what they're into, what they're doing, kind of what we're doing now.
Right.
It's just meeting someone face-to-face really helps. And you develop a connection by doing that.
Of course.
And instantly it changes things. So
right.
That's what I think, yeah.
Nice. When it comes to mixing, what are some of the most challenging aspects of mixing, and how do you address these challenges?
Getting files that are properly organized. No, usually it's vocal stuff or working with stuff recorded by other engineers sometimes can be a bit challenging.
Right.
And like I said, if it's out of your control, there's only so much you can do, but you have to do the best you can, and if I'm not getting, there have been a few times where I haven't gotten a great vocal recording, and instead of me carving away at it with EQ or all that stuff, I'll try to get them to come in and redo it if possible, but you don't always have that option if they're out of state or there's just no budget for it.
Yeah. Nice. And kind of similarly, what advice would you give to experienced musicians when it comes to preparing their tracks for mixing? If they don't have that good recording or whatever, do you actually help guide them on how to record better, or what do you do? Oh,
sure, yeah. I can do a Zoom call with people or go to their place and just try to improve it. Unfortunately, your room sounds like your room.
Yes.
You can put up some sound treatment if you want to, or go overboard with it and put up like eggshell foam everywhere, that Orlex stuff, and then you just have a weird, dull-sounding room with standing waves in the mid-range.
Right.
So
I've even had mixed results with those shell things that go around the microphone. Like there's a variety of different brands that make those, and in my opinion, those can work, but it always kind of affects the sound a little bit, and different ways. So it's something else you have to consider as well.
It's like wearing a baseball cap or something, where you can't really you lose just some peripheral vision.
Exactly. Exactly. So when it comes to production stuff, how do you balance the creativity versus the commercial success? Like, how do you balance artistic integrity with the commercial viability when producing a record?
Commercial viability. Oh, I see. Yeah, I was having a recent mix project was kind of like that, where I was trying to mix a song so it sounded good to me, which in my taste is like a modern sound.
Right.
And this client wanted it to sound a bit more old school, and meaning a little warmer, a little more 70s, I guess. And so sometimes, you kind of want to bring the mix up to speed, but still maintain their integrity. And that's a challenging thing.
Yeah.
Also, low end is what separates the good mixers from the,
Right.
I should have mentioned that earlier. Yeah.
Well, and also, I've done mixes where I get the low end sounding great, and then I send it to the client, and their studio isn't treated right, and so they're thinking the low end is weird, and so it's like you have to fight with them about that too. It's like, no, it's good, I promise. Listen in the car, listen on headphones, listen on different systems. You know, so
like I know mine's right.
So, in your view, how crucial is the mixing stage in the overall process of music production?
In my opinion, because of what I do for a living, very crucial to me. That's kind of what I listen for. But at the same time, I wonder how many records I grew up listening to and still do that sound horrible, that I love. That's
true.
It could be punk rock, or just even some pop music comes out and it's just not mixed very well. But the music is good. So in the end, the song is what is going to sell it.
Of course.
And it doesn't matter how much lipstick you put on a pig or whatever.
But it's interesting because by the same token, mixing really can make it dramatically better.
It can,
too. So it's definitely a fine line to walk, when you're talking about that.
Would you still listen to Dark Side of the Moon if it didn't sound as good? Probably. You would? Yeah.
For sure. Where do you see the future of mixing going, especially with emergence of immersive formats like Dolby Atmos?
I'm terrified of that stuff, yeah.
Really?
Well, there's a lot of pressure. Like if I'm in this engineer group and they talk about Dolby Atmos a lot and these other surround, and I haven't really adopted it here yet. I easily could.
Yeah.
I guess if I get rid of this couch and set up a few more speakers.
You shouldn't have to.
Shouldn't have to.
No, it's all good.
And it's just... I don't know. Like my personal interest is in stereo recording, and I think a lot of that stuff is kind of not really usable for the masses. I mean, like what is Dolby Atmos really going to be used for? It's going to be for movie theaters and audio files on a level that very few people attain. You know, that can afford.
Well, it's interesting too because Apple's been pushing with the whole AirPods and with Apple Music, like if you have AirPods and an iPhone, that's the default setting is Dolby Atmos.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit scary in a sense where, you won't even hear what the stereo should be, what they really spent time on. It's like you hear the Atmos first, so it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, if I was going into film mixing, that would be a different story. I would consider it. And,
well, even with that, I've done a number of film projects, and honestly, like I've done projects where I know quite a few composers and people in that world that do all of their productions in stereo or at most 5.1, and then they'll deliver stems to the dub mixer, and then they will split it out to Atmos, and so it's like you kind of don't even need it, even though the final is in Atmos. It's like this weird sort of middle ground of in between,
You can treat it almost like mastering.
Yeah. So kind of, I mean, I hesitate with whenever I hear about that. I was like, really? You're going to let someone else decide how to spread it out? And, it's a can of worms, though, for sure. So when you're engineering projects, what advice do you give to musicians to prepare for a session to achieve the best possible performance?
I would say have your parts rehearsed extremely well. Just know exactly what you're doing.
Right.
And depending on if you're trying to minimize the money you're spending, then that's what I would suggest. If you have a budget to kind of figure it out in the studio, then that's fine.
Some people even write in the studio if they have money to spend,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're a musician, I would just use the studio what it's for. Like do what you have to do at the studio. If you're doing drum recording or something that requires a lot of microphones or setup, focus on that. Don't spend a lot of time melodyning or doing things on that you can do on a laptop in a cafe.
Right.
That's if you're trying to conserve resources. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide, The Art Method, the Advanced Recording Toolkit. In it, I share the details of how you can get pro studio results from your home studio. I've believed for a long time that it's the cooking, not the kitchen. If you can learn some of the advanced methods for getting great results in the studio, you can do it in any studio. I skip the basics and dive into the more nuanced info you need to level up the quality of your home studio recordings. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/art. And now, back to the show. So we kind of talked about this a little earlier, but in a different sense, where do you see music production heading in the next decade, especially in terms of changing industry dynamics and technological developments?
I don't know. I guess AI would be the biggest thing to look out for. I'm curious as to where that's going. I don't think anyone really knows. I'm not concerned about it encroaching on engineering or mixing work or any of that, but creatively it could be used as a tool for sure. And why not? If it can be used, it will be.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing. Commercially, I don't know. Everything is really different now with how streaming has taken over. Any music project I'm involved in as a musician, I don't even remotely think about money. Like that's just to do it for my own neurotic reasons. You know?
Right. But it's kind of a fine line to walk, obviously, because obviously people are doing it for money and are doing it for success and fame. So it's like it's a challenging world to navigate. But at the same time, it's the world is your oyster as far as an independent musician. Like you could never do what you could in the past as an independent, so it's,
if you want to be real cynical about it, you can say that making the music, doing that whole production is just a really expensive business card for something else. You're selling yourself. You have to be a personality on merchandise, YouTube hits, like whatever, subscriptions. It's music in and of itself as a moneymaker, I don't really know.
Right, it's kind of like the sidestep in a sense, Yeah. I mean, I'm no business expert side of it at all, so
like we're like studio guys.
Yeah. So but it's interesting to think about, the different dynamics in it.
Yeah.
Can you share an experience from a particular project that was exceptionally challenging or rewarding from a mixer's perspective?
Can I do both?
Sure.
Okay. There was one session, if I don't mention exactly what it was.
Of course,
where the source material was on a 2-inch tape recorded in the 90s. This was a jazz project.
Okay.
And then we did overdubs on that at a studio, like a full band with horns and woodwinds and all that stuff. And it was just a big adventure doing it. So I had to get this tape from 1990. I think it was recorded at Mad Hatter Studios, which is owned by Chick Corea, and then donated to the Church of Scientology and all that. And I got that. I had the tape baked by this woman named Barbara who used to work at Quantigy up in, I think, Burbank somewhere. And so she baked the tape in her scientific oven. I got it, and I went to Stagg Street, transferred it to Pro Tools there, and then organized those tracks. We did some elastic audio. We did some stuff on it to kind of change it a bit, and it all worked. It sounded, and that process of trying different algorithms and I got to stretch the drums this way and do this, and then we took that and overdubbed a giant big band over it.
Jeez.
Sans rhythm section. It's just and make that all sound cohesive. That was a challenge. It was tricky. It was difficult, but the end result was really amazing. And so it was kind of both challenging and rewarding.
Nice.
Trying to think of something that was just like challenging and a grind to get through, but I mean, there's like sessions like we did recently, our last one, that was a 50-piece orchestra.
Right.
That was challenging, but it was fun and it's stress. I think guys like us feed off of stress. Like to me, it's a source of energy. It's like gasoline.
Right.
So I love doing those kind of sessions. A little fewer and far between than they used to be, so I get a little bit more anxious about it beforehand.
That's okay.
So that was very challenging, but we did it. We just because
pulled it off.
You guys know what you're doing, so
all good. That
was at East West, by the way.
Similarly, can you share like a memorable moment? I mean, I guess you kind of did, but one that was really significantly enhanced or transformed a musician's performance in the studio.
Can I think for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me think. Transform a musician's?
Yeah, like how you helped a musician to overcome an obstacle, or.
I see.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's tricky because if you're just an engineer, you have to let them sweat it out sometimes.
Yeah.
And
sometimes, yeah.
You have to it's a chord that they're playing. They're like, and you could just say like, just do this instead. But you can't say that because you're in that role. I think being at Westlake kept me in this very regimented state of mind. I compartmentalize things. Like even though I was a producer too, if I'm in the role as an engineer, you have to be like this.
Exactly.
And not show no facial expressions or emotions, which is fun. But I'm trying to think of a specific example of when I like changed the performance. I'm having trouble like coming up with
okay.
I'm sure there has been. Yeah.
That's a good point about the different roles too, because if you're like you just said, if you're hired as an engineer, but you certainly know what could happen, it's like you are walking that line of not wanting to step on the producer's toes or keeping everyone happy. It's very interesting how to walk that line. And at the same time, it's it's difficult sometimes because, like, as a progression of our careers, we start off as assistants, usually go to engineering, and those roles are very kind of like fly on the wall. Like, keep your mouth shut, don't say anything. But then the very next step is production and mixing and everything else, where you're encouraged to give your input and you're encouraged to help the artist in any way you can.
If my hair is on fire, you can then speak up and say something. Yeah.
Right.
I remember I was in this one session with Hal Lindez from the Dire Straits. And, and this is after Mike Hedge is the producer. He's amazing. He's like one of my favorite people.
Nice.
They left, the artist left, and like Hal was playing musician and co-writing. And we got to sit there, and I was trying to get him to do something. And I was just engineering, but kind of the lines got blurred there. And he's like, I don't know what you mean. Like, what do you ask me to do? And I said, let me see the guitar. And I showed him. And he's like, oh, I see, that's cool. And then he did it.
Right.
Whatever, I forget, it was like a tremolo thing I was trying to get him to do. And that was a really cool experience because it's like a legendary guitar player from one of my favorite bands growing up.
Nice.
I used to play their songs and like
That's awesome.
So
nice.
Those experiences make up, I guess, for the the less than stellar ones.
All good. So what are some, if you can talk about it, some current or recent projects, maybe stuff that's come out recently or something like that?
Let me see. I have a music video that I mixed the song to from this artist named Sin, C-I-N.
Okay.
And that one's going to be called Moments. That's should be released anytime now. I'm just sort of waiting. And he showed me some of the video. It was filmed really well.
Nice.
And I'm proud of the mix. It's R&B, hip-hop stuff, and mixed it here in this room.
Nice.
And I really trust my low end. It's and he's a great client. He's just easy to work with and positive. He's just a great guy. So that's something recent. I have something from a client named Susan Winsberg. She just released a song. It was an instrumental album with flute as the main instrument.
Okay.
That's her instrument. So that was recently released.
Nice.
And I'm starting a new project with Ruben Najera, and that's going to be, I think, an EP, 6 to 7 songs.
Nice.
Mostly singer-songwriter, guitar-based things with maybe some overdubs.
Nice.
And that's pretty much what I've been doing recently.
You seem to be across a lot of different genres and avenues of music. Is there anything that you kind of focus on at all, or you just kind of do it all?
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, I have a lot of experience in jazz. I've done several records with Brent Fischer and worked with pretty much all the A-list studio guys in town.
Right.
I just saw this. There's this place called the Write-Off Room in Studio City. I don't know if you've been there.
No,
we should go. Anyway, but
nice.
so this big band was playing. All the guys that we've seen in studio, like Peter Erskine was on drums from Weather Report. I've been to his house. I remember working on that one Brent Fischer project. And that's a weird thing to start doing the big band recordings and stuff. Right. That's something you see as like really older engineers doing, and it's this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Brent Fischer was someone I started working with when it was one of my oldest clients.
Okay.
Not old like in age, but as far as like one of my first clients. And he hired me when I was still at Clear Lake Audio just to do some laptop editing at his house, like nothing.
Yeah.
And somehow that became me doing the big large format recordings.
Nice.
And I remember the first one I did was at the Bridge.
Okay.
Which is now what's that one now?
Silent Zoom.
Yeah. And I wasn't ready for it. And I already had rock bands under my belt, doing all sorts of stuff. And I thought,
it's a whole different
It's a whole thing because these are like union players, and it's a lot of people. You get like 20 people in the room, plus there's a drummer in there, there was piano, there was stand-up bass. And
had you done orchestral stuff at all, or? Oh.
Well, I think maybe by that time I did like a 10-piece.
Just a little bit, yeah.
I did something like John Newman's record. Yeah,
but big bands, like from an engineering perspective, it's way more complex than orchestral because there's so many mics on the floor. It's like literally fill up the whole console with mics. It's crazy.
All the woodwind players, for the most part, are doubling, usually on flute, and so that's a different mic. You can't, you need one kind of up here.
Right.
And so they usually have KM84s, those type of microphones,
right.
small diaphragm condensers, and then they have their large diaphragm for the.
Yeah. Anyway, it gets crazy.
Then I'll use 2 microphones. If it's a bassoon or bass clarinet, I got to use 2 microphones.
Right.
Because the sound comes out different places.
Yeah.
And so it gets a bit complicated. And those guys just sit down and start playing. There's no sound check.
Right.
And you're lucky if you get a line check because there's no time.
Yeah.
And that first time I wasn't ready for it. And I was catching up, and I had that stress of them waiting in the room.
Yeah.
But the next one, I knew what kind of level of preparation to bring to the session, and that one went really well. That was at Conway Studio C, my second one, and that was fine. Yeah. So it's just, you had those first experiences that you learned so many lessons, and I can't even think of what they were exactly. But it was just sort of like, I need to find another gear.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. Yeah. Nice. I like to wrap up each podcast by going over the same few questions for everyone. Sure. The first one is, who is your most influential teacher? And it can be a few if you want.
I would say John Heiler was one. Mm-hmm. Probably, because he kind of took me in when I was really starting out and floundering a bit. And definitely Steve Burdick at Westlake was my biggest teacher influence. And although at a studio like that, when you work there, they don't teach you anything. There's no job training.
No.
So, but the lessons he taught me were just sort of behavioral and just how to be professional and what questions not to ask. There are stupid questions. They're like, don't whine, don't complain about stuff. Just always be binary, yes or no. Are you going to do this? Yes, no. Like, don't say yes, but da-da-da-da.
Right.
Little things like that. And, he was strict with us, but I always thought he was great. Amazing guy. I always say hi to him when I work there now. Yeah. They still hire me once in a while.
Nice.
But,
awesome.
Those two. Yeah.
Awesome. Next one is, what is your favorite reference track if you have to go to a new studio, kind of figure out the room? Or if you even do that.
I don't really have
some guys don't do that.
Yeah, I don't really do that. I kind of, especially if I'm recording, I sort of just get used to the room sound. And I'm kind of familiar with most of the places I work in at this point.
Right.
But if I was mixing, depends on the genre.
Yeah, of course.
And even like Rihanna's Umbrella was always something we listened to at Westlake to to help kind of calibrate rooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Last question. What would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming engineer?
I think it's just making yourself indispensable and sort of useful to or find some a direction you want to go in, find someone doing it and make yourself indispensable to that person. Help them out. Don't approach it as in you have some experience or skill that they need from you.
Right.
It's sort of find out what they need and fulfill that. And if you're really young, just dive into it. Don't worry about paying bills or doing whatever. If someone really want to do this for a living, they could crash here. There's always a way to do what you want if you're willing to sort of sacrifice some of those creature comforts for a while.
Yeah.
And it's like going in a submarine for 4 years. Bye,
4
everyone.
years.
Yeah, or whatever. I don't know what your experience was, but it felt like we would be at Westlake I would sleep there sometimes.
Yeah.
Overnight.
No, absolutely. I did that.
I was lucky. Some of the guys there would be on a session for Rihanna or whoever it was for 6 months.
Right.
And fortunately, I was always able to kind of do different things and engineer a lot. I got around that, but that's also an important thing. Is just grinding it out in a big studio. I would say work at the biggest studio you can.
Yeah.
Get the discipline, get the high pressure clients, and learn how to deal with stress.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if you want to be a mixing guy, go intern or assist for a mixing engineer.
Right.
And just stick to that specialization. Yeah.
It's crazy. Nice. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Appreciate it.
Sweet. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe for all the updates, and I'll see you next week.